The desert is where the weak perish and secrets are buried. But sometimes, it is where a lost soul is reborn to bring the buried truth back into the light. The desert night was a silent witness to a terrible intent. Arthur stood over the shallow pit, his breath coming in ragged bursts. At his feet lay his wife Sophia, still and pale from a powerful sleeping draught. He reached down, his hands trembling, ready to cast her into the grave. But a lone coyote howled in the darkness, a mournful sound that pierced the silence and his thin courage. In the stark moonlight, Sophia's face seemed almost serene, her features peaceful in a way he had not seen in years. A wave of animal fear washed over him, cold and suffocating. He was a thief, a cheat, but this final act felt different. This was the work of a monster, and he was not sure he could become one. He stumbled back from the edge of the pit, the shovel falling from his numb fingers with a dull thud. The reality of his deed, the irreversible finality of it, crashed down upon him. This was not some clever scheme discussed with Isabella over wine. This was dirt and silence and the cold weight of a life in his hands. He could not do it. His nerve had shattered completely. A frantic sob escaped his throat as he turned and scrambled away from the scene of his failure. He did not look back at the woman he was leaving to the mercy of the elements. He only ran, his mind a whirlwind of panic, his only thought to escape the ghost he had almost created. His horse stamped nervously as he fumbled with the reins, his hands shaking too badly to secure them properly. He finally managed to haul himself into the saddle, kicking the animal into a desperate gallop. The wind whipped at his face, but it could not erase the image of Sophia lying beside that open grave. Had he given her enough of the draught? Would she awaken to the horror of her abandonment? The questions tormented him, fueling his flight. He rode hard, pushing his horse relentlessly, as if he could outrun his own conscience. The sprawling, indifferent desert swallowed the sound of his retreat, leaving only silence, and a woman suspended between life and death under the cold stars. Back at the edge of the pit, the world remained still. Sophia's breathing was shallow, a faint whisper against the vast emptiness of the plains. The moonlight traced the elegant line of her jaw, the fine fabric of her dress now soiled with dust. The coyote's call faded into the distance, replaced by the low sigh of the night wind moving through sparse creosote bushes. She was alone, utterly vulnerable, a fragile form left to the harsh judgment of the wilderness. The shovel lay where Arthur had dropped it, a crude marker for a crime that had been conceived in greed but abandoned in cowardice. The night held its breath, waiting for the dawn and what it might bring. As the first rays of dawn painted the horizon in hues of rose and gold, the Comanche warrior Ohi brought his horse to a halt. The animal was agitated, its ears twitching at something unseen. Ohi's gaze swept the landscape, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the disturbed earth first, a dark scar on the pale desert floor. Then he saw the form lying beside it. A woman. He dismounted, his movements fluid and cautious, his hand resting near the rifle sheathed at his side. He approached slowly, his expression grim. He expected to find death, another tragedy left by the uncaring world. But as he drew closer, he saw the faint, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her still form. She was cold to the touch, her skin like porcelain. He could see the fine quality of her dress beneath the dirt and grime, a stark contrast to her grim surroundings. This was a woman of wealth, of another world, abandoned here for reasons he could only guess at. But the reasons did not matter. What mattered was the flicker of life that remained. He saw the tracks of a single horse leading away, ridden hard. This was no accident. A cold fury settled in his heart. To leave a person to the mercy of the sun and the scavengers was an act of profound cruelty. He would not let it be her fate. Gently, Ohi lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if her ordeal had already taken its toll. He wrapped her in the thick wool blanket from his horse, shielding her from the morning chill. He worked with a quiet efficiency, securing her before mounting his own horse. The journey to his people's camp would be slow, but it was her only chance. As he urged his horse forward, he glanced down at her pale face. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, but the gaze was vacant, unfocused. The potion and the shock of her abandonment had stolen her memories, leaving a hollow shell where a person used to be. He rode through the arid landscape, a silent protector carrying a fragile burden. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the land, but the woman in his arms remained lost in a deep, unnatural slumber. He gave her small sips of water from his canteen, his touch gentle. He was a warrior, a man who had seen much hardship, but the sight of her helplessness stirred a protective instinct deep within him. He did not know her name or her story, but he knew that a great injustice had been done. And as he rode toward the safety of his home, he made a silent vow to see that this injustice would not be the end of her story. The arrival of a white woman in the Comanche camp caused a stir of surprise and suspicion. But Naya, the wise wife of the chief, silenced the murmurs with a single look. She approached Ohi and gazed at the unconscious woman he carried. Naya's eyes, deep and knowing, saw past the strange clothes and pale skin. She saw a spirit fighting to hold onto life. "Bring her to my lodge," Naya said, her voice calm and authoritative. "The desert tried to claim her, but her spirit is strong." Inside the lodge, Naya began her work, cleaning the dirt from the woman's face and applying a soothing poultice of crushed yucca root and river clay to her forehead to draw out the fever. For days, Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind a fog of confusion. When she finally awoke, her memory was a blank canvas. She looked at the buffalo hide walls of the lodge, at the unfamiliar face of Naya, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. Naya spoke to her in a gentle tone, offering her a warm broth. "You are safe now," she said. "You fought like a bear to survive. We will call you Nita. It means bear." Sophia, now Nita, accepted the name as she accepted the food. It was the first piece of a new identity in a world where her old one was completely gone. She watched Ohi from a distance, the silent man who had brought her here. Nita's recovery was slow. Her body healed, but her mind remained a fractured landscape of forgotten things. She learned simple tasks, helping Naya grind corn or mend clothes. The Comanche way of life was strange, but it had a rhythm, a connection to the earth that she found soothing. Ohi was a constant, quiet presence. He would bring her wildflowers he found on his patrols, or simply sit near the lodge in the evenings, carving a piece of wood. He never pushed her to speak, never asked questions she could not answer. His patience was a balm to her frayed nerves, a steady anchor in the sea of her confusion. One evening, as the sun set, Nita sat with Ohi by the fire. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ohi looked at the flames for a long moment before answering. "My people believe that life is a sacred gift. To see it thrown away is an offense to the Creator," he said. "Your spirit called out, and my horse heard it. It was not my place to question it." His words were simple, yet they held a profound weight. In his world, there was a reason for everything, a purpose. For the first time since her awakening, Nita felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a purpose for her being here too. Back in the town of Redemption, Arthur was a man living on a knife's edge. He did not know if Sophia was alive or dead, and the uncertainty was a poison in his veins. He put on a convincing performance for Sheriff Cole, a man more interested in his lunchtime whiskey than in a thorough investigation. "She just vanished, Sheriff," Arthur said, his voice thick with false grief. "One moment she was in her garden, the next, gone." Sheriff Cole nodded sympathetically, promising to organize a search party he had no intention of leading very far. Arthur's story was accepted, and the town pitied the handsome, grieving widower. His lover, Isabella, was a more practical sort of comfort. "You are a fool for running, Arthur," she told him in the privacy of her parlor. "You should have finished the job." Her voice was cold, her ambition a sharp contrast to his unraveling nerves. "It is done now," he snapped, pouring himself a large brandy. "She is gone. The desert does not give people back." But even as he said the words, he could not fully believe them. Every knock on the door made him jump. Every passing shadow looked like a specter of his wife. This fear made him reckless, desperate to secure the inheritance before his world came crashing down. He wasted no time. The day after the sheriff declared the search fruitless, Arthur met with Mr. Sterling, a land speculator with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Sterling's eyes gleamed with avarice as Arthur explained his desire to liquidate his late wife's extensive landholdings quickly and quietly. "A tragedy. A true tragedy," Sterling said, his voice oozing insincere sympathy. "Of course, I can help a man in your unfortunate position." They struck a deal that was heavily in Sterling's favor, but Arthur did not care. He needed the money, and he needed it now. He had to get away from redemption, away from the ghost that haunted him. The deal included the vast tracts of land bordering the Comanche territory, lands that Sophia's father had promised would remain untouched in a treaty of friendship. Arthur knew this, but he dismissed it. "That was an old agreement," he told Sterling with a wave of his hand. "A handshake deal with heathens. It holds no legal weight." Sterling grinned. "My thoughts exactly. The law is what is written on paper, signed, and sealed." Their pact was made, a conspiracy of greed that would set in motion a conflict they could not begin to imagine, all built upon a foundation of lies and a woman left for dead in the desert. Life in the Comanche camp settled into a routine for Nita. Yet her mind remained a place of shadows. Flashes of memory would come unbidden, sharp and confusing. The sweet, cloying taste of a drink, the feel of fine silk against her skin, a man's face twisted not in anger but in a strange, terrible fear. These images were like puzzle pieces from a box she could not open. They left her feeling frightened and exhausted. She would often wake up in the night, her heart pounding, the echoes of a forgotten nightmare clinging to her. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, a ghost haunting someone else's life. Oh, he saw her distress. He began to spend more time with her, not speaking of her past, but teaching her of his. He showed her how to read the tracks of animals in the dust, how to listen to the language of the wind. He took her to a high mesa overlooking the plains and told her the stories of his ancestors, tales of courage and loss written in the stars. "Our memories are what make us who we are," he said one day, his voice gentle. "But sometimes, a person must be born again. Perhaps this is your new beginning." His words were a comfort, suggesting a future instead of a lost past. A bond grew between them, quiet and strong. It was in the way he would watch her from across the camp, ensuring she was safe. It was in the way she would find a rare desert flower left at the entrance of her lodge. One afternoon, while they were gathering herbs, she stumbled on a loose rock. Ojai caught her, his hands firm on her arms. For a moment, they stood close, the silence of the canyon surrounding them. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw a depth of feeling that mirrored her own growing affection. It was a connection that transcended words, a silent understanding between two wounded souls. Later that week, Ojai shared a piece of his own pain. He told her of the wife and child he had lost years ago to a fever brought by settlers. "Grief can be a prison," he said, his gaze distant. "It can lock you in the past. But the sun also rises on a new day. We must honor the dead by living." Nita understood then that his calm exterior hid a deep well of sorrow. His own tragedy gave him a unique empathy for her suffering. He was not just her protector. He was her fellow traveler on a difficult road. And in that shared understanding, the first seeds of love began to take root in the barren soil of her forgotten life. The peace of the camp was shattered one morning when a scout rode in, his face grim. "They are on the sacred lands," he reported to the chief. "White men with measuring chains and stakes. They are marking the earth." A wave of anger rippled through the council. That land, known as the Valley of the Ancestors, was protected by the treaty made with Sophia's father, a man the Comanche had respected. It was a place of spiritual significance, not to be carved up and sold. Ojai's expression hardened. He knew who was behind this. The widower's greed had now become a direct threat to his people. He volunteered to lead a party to confront the intruders. Ojai and a dozen warriors rode out, not for war, but for parley. They found Mr. Sterling and his crew of hired guns driving stakes into the ground. Sterling watched their approach with a smirk, his hand resting on the handle of his sidearm. "This is our land by treaty," Ojai stated, his voice calm but firm. "You are not welcome here." Sterling laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "I have a new treaty," he said, waving a piece of paper. Signed by the land's new owner, Arthur Gable. Your deal was with a dead man. Now move along before my men are forced to civilize you savages. The insult hung in the air, thick and heavy. Ohi's warriors tensed, their hands moving to their bows. Sterling's men raised their rifles. The situation was a spark away from a blaze. This is your only warning, Sterling, Ohi said, his voice low and dangerous. Leave this valley. For a moment, Sterling hesitated, seeing the deadly resolve in the warrior's eyes. But his greed was stronger than his fear. Fire a warning shot, he ordered one of his men. A rifle cracked, the bullet kicking up dust near Ohi's horse. Instantly, an arrow flew from a Comanche bow, embedding itself in the shoulder of the man who fired. He cried out and dropped his weapon. The man was injured, but not fatally. It was a message. Sterling's face went pale. He had mistaken calm for weakness. These were not men who would be easily intimidated. "Fall back!" he yelled to his crew. They scrambled to help their wounded comrade and retreated, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. Ohi and his warriors did not give chase. They watched until the intruders were gone. Then Ohi turned his horse back toward the camp. He had avoided a massacre, but he knew this was only the beginning. The man named Arthur had started a fire that would soon rage out of control, and he had to tell Nita what he had learned. Ohi returned to the camp with a heavy heart. He found Nita near the stream, and he told her what had happened in the valley. He spoke of the men with their stakes and chains, of the man named Sterling. When he uttered the name of the man who had signed the paper, the name that had brought this trouble to their doorstep, he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Arthur," he said, his voice grave. The name was a key, turning a lock in the deepest recesses of her mind. Suddenly, the fragmented images that had haunted her for weeks began to swirl and connect with terrifying speed. The sweet taste of the drink, the carriage ride into the darkness, the cold night air, the scrape of a shovel on rock, and the face. The face of the man filled with fear, his eyes wide in the moonlight as he abandoned her. Arthur, her husband. The whole horrific night came rushing back to her in a single devastating wave of memory. She let out a cry, stumbling back, the world spinning around her. It was not a nightmare. It was real. "He left me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and fury. "He tried to kill me." She looked at Ohi, her eyes now blazing with a clarity that had been absent for months. The pain of the betrayal was a physical blow, so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. Her husband, the man who had vowed to protect her, had tried to bury her for the sake of his greed and his mistress. Isabella. That name surfaced too, another piece of the ugly puzzle. He had left her to die so he could have her inheritance and start a new life. And now, he was selling the land her father had cherished, breaking a sacred promise to the very people who had saved her life. The passive, gentle Nita vanished in that moment, replaced by the rightful fury of Sophia Gable. She looked at her hands, then at the simple buckskin dress she wore. This life, this camp, had been her sanctuary when she had nothing. These people had shown her more kindness than her own husband ever had. Her personal tragedy was now intertwined with the fate of Ohi's people. "He will not get away with this," she said, her voice shaking but firm with resolve. "He wanted to erase me. He wanted to steal everything my father built. I will not let him." She looked at Ohi, no longer a lost soul but a woman with a purpose. "You saved my life. Will you help me take it back?" Sophia, no longer Nita, stood before the council of elders. With Ohi at her side, she told her story. Her voice was clear and strong as she recounted Arthur's treachery, the poison, and his cowardly flight. She explained the land sales and the broken treaty. The elders listened in silence, their weathered faces impassive, but their eyes showed a deep understanding. Her story confirmed their worst suspicions about the new owner of the lands. When she finished, the chief, a man of great wisdom, spoke. "Your fight is now our fight. The honor of your father's word must be restored. We will support you." The decision was made. They would ride to redemption not for war, but for justice. Ohi swore an oath to be her guide and protector in the white man's world she had to face again. Preparations began at once. Sophia shed the simple buckskin dress and, with Naya's help, pieced together an outfit more suitable for town, though it felt strange and confining after months of freedom. She felt a pang of sadness leaving the camp that had become her home, but she knew she could not truly be free until the truth was revealed and Arthur faced the consequences of his actions. She was a different woman now, stronger and more resilient than before. A small group was chosen to accompany them, Ojai and 5 of his most trusted warriors. They were not an army, but a guard of honor, a symbol that Sophia did not stand alone. As they prepared to leave, Naya gave Sophia a small, smooth stone. "For courage," the old woman said. "Remember the strength of the bear." Sophia clutched the stone, its coolness a comfort in her hand. She looked at Ojai, mounted on his horse, his face calm and resolute. In his eyes, she saw not only support but a deep, unspoken affection. Their shared journey had forged a bond that gave her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The journey to redemption was tense. They rode across the plains that had almost been her grave, but now she looked upon them with new eyes. She saw not an empty wasteland, but a land of harsh beauty that had, through its own mysterious ways, delivered her to safety. As they neared the town, the familiar shapes of the buildings on the horizon brought a fresh wave of anxiety. This was the world that had betrayed her. But she straightened her shoulders and met Ojai's steady gaze. She was not the same woman who had left this town. She was returning not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to reclaim her life and her name. The sight of a well-dressed woman riding into redemption, flanked by 6 Comanche warriors, brought the town to a standstill. People stopped in the dusty streets to stare, their mouths agape. Sophia ignored them, her eyes fixed on the sign of the land office. That was where she would find him. With Ojai at her side, she dismounted and walked purposefully toward the building, the warriors fanning out behind her in a silent, intimidating formation. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Arthur was there, bent over a map with Mr. Sterling and Isabella, a champagne flute in his hand. He looked up as the door opened, a smile of satisfaction on his face. The smile froze, then melted away into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. It was Sophia, alive, not a ghost, but a living, breathing woman standing before him, her eyes burning with an intensity that stripped him bare. "Hello, husband," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sterling's jaw dropped. For a long moment, the only sound was the fizzing of the spilled champagne on the wooden floor. Arthur's mind, which had been tormented by possibility, now shattered against the wall of reality. His greatest fear was standing right in front of him. He was ruined. The trial, the prison, the gallows, it all flashed before his eyes. Panic, raw and primal, took over. With a desperate cry, he lunged for the revolver he kept in his desk drawer. He was not thinking of escape, only of ending the nightmare. He would finish what he had failed to do in the desert. He raised the weapon, his hand shaking violently, and pointed it directly at Sophia. He never had the chance to fire. Before his finger could find the trigger, a shot rang out, deafening in the small office. The revolver was violently knocked from Arthur's grasp, spinning through the air before clattering to the floor. Ojai stood in the doorway, his own firearm still smoking, his aim true and precise. He had not aimed to kill, only to disarm. Arthur stared at his stinging, empty hand, then at the calm, deadly warrior who had thwarted him. His last desperate gamble had failed. The warriors moved into the room, their presence filling the space, and Arthur collapsed into a chair, a broken man, his face buried in his hands. The commotion brought Sheriff Cole running. The trial was swift and informal, held right there in the stunned silence of the land office, with half the town peering through the windows. Sophia told her story, her voice never wavering. She spoke of the poison, the ride into the desert, the open grave, and her husband's terrified flight. She spoke of her rescue by Ojai, and the life she had found among the Comanche. The town doctor, a man of integrity, was summoned. He confirmed that Arthur had recently purchased a large quantity of a potent sleeping draught, claiming it was for a sick horse. The evidence was overwhelming. Arthur, broken and cornered, offered no defense. He confessed to everything, his words tumbling out in a pathetic stream, implicating both Isabella and a terrified Mr. Sterling in his schemes. Justice, once a distant concept in redemption, was delivered. Arthur and Isabella were taken into custody by the sheriff, their reign of deceit over. Sterling's fraudulent land deeds were immediately declared void. The law had finally caught up with them, brought to its senses by a woman who refused to be erased, and the people who had stood by her side. In the days that followed, Sophia worked with a lawyer to undo the damage Arthur had done. She legally tore up every sale agreement made by Sterling. Then, she drafted a new, ironclad document, a formal deed that granted the Valley of the Ancestors to the Comanche people forever, fulfilling her father's promise in a way that no man could ever break again. She settled her financial affairs, ensuring she had the means to live independently. But as she walked the familiar streets of redemption, she realized it was no longer her home. Her heart was elsewhere. When her work was done, she did not stay. She said her goodbyes to the few townspeople who had shown her kindness, and rode out of redemption without a backward glance. Ojai and his warriors rode with her. They returned not to the camp of strangers she had arrived at months ago, but to a place she now considered home. She had faced her past and won. Now her future was her own to choose. She chose a life under the wide-open sky, a life of honor and truth. She chose to be with the quiet warrior who had seen her not as an inheritance to be stolen, but as a life worth saving, and in doing so had won her heart completely.